This evening, we are going to be discussing faith and deeds. Now, for many of us that have been in the church for a while, which looks like majority of the crowd, one would almost take this verse that I'm going to be reading for granted because it becomes part of our everyday. But I've also seen in recent times, especially last weekend, I was away with a bunch of friends of mine on a soccer trip. And I was actually quite amazed to find out how many of them are Christians or believers. Very good-hearted people that love each other, that are always there for each other, but sometimes by their actions I wouldn't quite put the one and two together. But in so saying, how often do we take time to reflect, to examine, to look at our own lives and just go back to some of the basics that Christ expects of us? So this evening we're going to be going through James chapter 2 from verse 14 through 26, if there's anybody who'd like to turn there with us. And we're also going to be going through an example of one of the great examples of faith and what actions went with the faith that made it so special. Verse 14 in James chapter 2 reads as follows: "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by actions, is dead. But somebody will say, 'You have faith and I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds.' You believe there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that, and they shudder." Verse 20, "You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, 'Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend.' You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone." Read that verse 24 one more time. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by their faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead." The next passage that we're going to be reading from is in Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through to 19. Again, a story that I'm sure many are familiar with. Chapter 22, from verse 1. Abram is tested. Sometime later, God tested Abram. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Verse 3, early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in a distance. He said to his servant, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abram, "Father?" "Yes, my son." Abram replied, "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abram answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went together. When they reached the place God had told them about, Abram built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abram, Abram." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abram looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram, caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abram called that place, "The Lord will provide." And so to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abram from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will be the possession of cities. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you obeyed me." Then Abram returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abram stayed in Beersheba. Now, if we look at the above text, what do you see and learn about Abram's faith? Firstly, after hearing what God expected of him, he didn't argue, he didn't delay or try and find his own way to resolve the circumstances he found himself in. God commanded him to take his one and only son and sacrifice him. Now, those of you that are parents here tonight, what kind of a command or question, how would you handle that? Would you, the next morning, start taking action and obey the Lord's instruction? The next morning, he started and he obeyed God's command. It took 3 days to get where God wanted them to go. Now, often in life, once we make a decision and we're able to action it straight away, if you make a commitment, if you say you're going to help somewhere, the quicker it gets done, the better. If it happens tomorrow, the commitment's made, you're able to achieve it, or you promise somebody something and you're able to deliver, that burden, that relief is off you. But if you make a commitment or you offer up time or you offer up something, but now you've got to wait before you're able to fulfill that commitment. That process of waiting sometimes makes it a lot more difficult. Not only that, he had 3 days to now spend with his son while he was traveling. Imagine you know what you need to do to obey God's will in this instance. And you spending 3 days with a person that you love, you care for, but you also know why you're going that end route. As I read this, keep just thinking about my own son and having to fulfill the same role that was instructed. And I still find it extremely, I can stand here, I can say I would try and do the same thing, but whether I would actually do it or not, That I hope I'll never be tested in the same way that Abram was tested. If you make a decision and do it and get over and done with, it is a lot easier than obviously delaying it. In verses 7 and 8, Isaac asked Abram his father, "Where is the lamb that we are sacrificing?" Now at this stage, his son in innocence looks up to his dad and says, "Dad, we've got everything ready for sacrifice, but where's the lamb we're sacrificing?" At this stage, your son, your loved one, your daughter, whoever it is, if you're a parent, is looking at you, asking for answers. And yet you know what you need to fulfill and follow through with. But watch how Abram answers. He doesn't try and find a solution. His comfort comes from placing it back to God. Verse 8, Abram answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." He gives it back to God to provide a way out. He himself doesn't try and say, firstly, doesn't answer his son outright what the current, but he believed God enough that God would find a way out of this for him. And he just answered what he needed to answer to give his boy the peace of mind that God is in control. Not me, I can't give you a solution. God said he will provide, and I'm still trusting, even today, when I know I've got to sacrifice you as my son, God will provide. When we find ourselves in a situation, how often do we also want to have an answer or solution? Look how Abram answers one of the most difficult questions he must have been asked. God himself will provide. Abram had faith in God. Often when somebody asks us a tough question, puts us on the spot, we're very quick to try and give what we feel, our opinion, how we would resolve it. Sometimes we need to take a step back and just let them know that God is with them and God will provide the outcome. We don't always have to have the answers. Sometimes we just need to give God space to do his work. Verses 9 through to 10. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abram built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Again, try and picture this. Just told your son, God will provide. A few moments later, he's building up an altar. Physically, the boy was of the age to carry wood. So he was understanding enough or old enough to understand what is taking place. He wasn't young. If he carried the wood, he was fairly solid, would assume more in his teenage years. But he could see there's an altar being built up. I'm being bound down onto the altar. The son must be looking to his dad at this time saying, "What you doing? Dad, what's going on?" And if we can just picture the faith Abram must have had to physically bound your son down, and not only his faith, he was prepared to sacrifice his son. Abram had bound his son onto the altar and was ready to sacrifice his son. I don't want to know what must have gone on in his mind, and I hope I will never be tested in this way. To see your living son before you and know that you'll be taking his life. But Abram was still prepared to do this in order to be obedient to God. Now, using this verse as an example, I'm going to go back and we're going to read through James again. And I want us to look at this example, how Abram was not only prepared to have faith in God, that God would provide a way out. And as we read later on, God provided a ram, and God gave him a way out. And due to his faith, he was blessed far more than we could have ever expected. Remember the circumstances with Abraham. They were battling to have children. God promised this child, and then for him to find out eventually that he's just received the son that he loves is going to be taken away from him, he must have been asking so many questions in his head, what is going on? But even through that, he constantly believed in God to provide a way out. I'm going to read through James chapter 2, verse 14 one more time. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if somebody claims to have faith but has not deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself is not accompanied, if not accompanied by action, is dead. But somebody will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there is a God, good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. That verse 19, only hit me, I think it was this year sometime, or maybe even late India, that even the demons believe God. So just going around accepting Christ as a Savior and accepting that God is God and Jesus is Jesus, and then finding out that even demons believe that doesn't necessarily change anything. Just knowing and believing something, that's only one step and one piece of the puzzle. In order to have complete faith, we need to also action. The demons fear God. The demons know who God is, but it doesn't make them righteous. Verse 20, you foolish person, do you not want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abram considered righteous for what he did? And we've just gone through the story of that. Just want to get to verse 26. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. Believing and having faith is not enough. We need to show our faith by our actions. We need to get involved with serving wherever we can. Inviting people to our houses, being hospitable, caring for the elderly, for the poor, for orphans, for those who are in need, teaching, giving. We've got various ministries within our church. But just knowing about them, just being a small part of them, I don't believe is enough. If we look at the actions and if we look at what God expected of Abraham to do, I believe he expects similar action from us as his followers and as his children. We all have different gifts. But if we are not using them, and if we are not serving God by serving others, we need to re-look how we are living our lives and our walk with Christ. What good is it for us to know what we must do, but yet we never do it? God expects us to be like Christ, who while on earth set a perfect example for us to show how we need to live our lives and how we need to treat one another. Are we living by faith? Are we trusting the Lord in all circumstances and in all that we do, that He will provide for us? We look at our lives, we look at our daily decisions we make. Do we believe and do we trust that the Lord will provide for us? And how often do we take it into our own actions and into our own control? Are we showing our faith by our deeds and actions. Again, looking inwardly. Are we only saying things, or are we acting? Are we leading a life that we have been called to lead? Are we setting an example so that others may want to follow Christ? I want to challenge each of us here tonight to have faith in God, to believe and to trust that He will provide, and for us to really put our trust wholeheartedly in Him. And that we will be like Christ and really start applying what we know is expected of us as Christians. Tonight, as we leave here, we have an opportunity to look at our lives and to apply our faith and apply the actions that comes with it. Let us not just be people that speak and know what is expected. Let us be the people that are out there setting examples for others to follow. I pray that this week we might be challenged, that we will look at our lives, and that we will strive to serve God in a way that is pleasing to Him.